He gave her everything. Not in the way people say it casually, "I gave you everything," meaning time or money or effort. He gave her everything in the way that leaves a person with nothing left. He gave her his savings, his apartment, his reputation, the job he had worked 10 years to build. He gave her a future when she arrived in this country with $40 and a suitcase held together with electrical tape. He asked for nothing in return, and she, Sarah Pere, did not betray him. What she did was something the people who watched their story had never seen before. Something that a man named Ju Hyung, the most feared name in Seoul's underworld, would one day call the reason he changed his life. This is their story, and it does not go the way you think. Before this story moves forward, I need you to understand something. What you are about to hear is not a simple story about a good man and a grateful woman. It is a story about the kind of loyalty that does not ask to be seen. The kind that works in the dark, in silence, over years. The kind that most people never witness because the person performing it never announces it. Mario Monroy did not expect a reward. Sarah Pere did not plan what happened next, and Ju Hyung, a man who had built his entire existence on the principle that no one does anything for free, was about to have every belief he held about human nature dismantled by a nurse from Lagos who arrived in Seoul with nothing. If you are not yet subscribed to this channel, do it now and turn on your notifications, because this story does not pause for anyone who arrives late. Seoul is a city that has seen everything. It has watched empires rise and collapse. It has rebuilt itself from rubble. It has transformed, within a single generation, from a city of poverty into one of the most advanced metropolitan centers on Earth. It does not flinch at ambition. It does not apologize for its contradictions, and it does not forgive weakness, which made it, on the surface, one of the least likely cities for a story about unconditional sacrifice to begin. Mario Monroy arrived in Seoul 11 years before this story reaches its turning point. He came from Seville, Spain, the third son of a civil engineer trained in international logistics, contracted to a mid-size freight company with a regional office in Yeongdeung-po. He was 26 years old. He spoke passable Korean, excellent English, and the particular language of a person who had decided at a young age that the world would not give him anything he did not go and collect himself. He was not searching for anyone. He was not the kind of man who looked for someone to save, but on a Tuesday evening in October, in the fluorescent-lit corridor of the Immigration Processing Office in Mapo-gu, he met a woman who was sitting on a plastic chair with a torn suitcase at her feet, a folder of papers on her lap, and the expression of a person who had run out of options, but had not yet run out of resolve. Her name was Sarah Pere, and she was about to change everything. Not by taking from Mario Monroy, but by becoming, eventually, exactly the person he had seen in her from the very first moment. Sarah Pere had come to Seoul on a nursing placement scholarship that had been withdrawn 48 hours before her departure from Lagos. The withdrawal was not her fault. The organization that had issued it had collapsed under a financial investigation. 47 other recipients had received the same notification, but unlike most of them, Sarah had already boarded the plane, using money she had borrowed from her mother's savings group, money that had been collected over 3 years by 12 women who met in a church hall in Surulere every second Saturday and pooled what they could. She had landed in Seoul with a valid tourist visa, a valid nursing qualification, $40 in her pocket, and no program to enter. She sat in the Immigration Processing Office for 6 hours while officials reviewed her documents. They were not unkind, but they were thorough, and thorough took time that Sarah did not have. Mario had come to the same office to collect a work permit renewal for a new logistics hire. He handled it in 20 minutes and was on his way out when he saw her. He almost kept walking. He was not a man given to impulse. He did not interfere in other people's situations. He had learned years earlier that offering help where it was not asked for was often more about the giver than the recipient. But something in the way she was sitting, not collapsed, not defeated, just completely still in the way that people become still when they are conserving every last resource, made him stop. He sat down in the chair beside her. "Do you need help with the forms?" he asked. She looked at him. "I need more than help with the forms," she said. He nodded. "Tell me the whole situation." She told him. All of it. The scholarship, the collapse, the borrowed money, the plane, the $40. She told him with the directness of a person who had already decided that pride was a luxury she could not afford that evening. Mario listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "I have a spare room," he said. "You can stay while you find a solution. I know someone at Yonsei Medical Center who handles international nursing placement. I can make a call." Sarah looked at him with the expression of a person who has been offered something that is either genuine or the beginning of something she will spend the next decade paying for. "Why?" she asked. Mario considered the question seriously, the way it deserved to be considered. "Because you came here for a reason," he said, "and the reason didn't disappear just because the organization collapsed." She studied him for a long moment. Then she picked up her suitcase. "Okay," she said, "but I will pay back every coin, every single one." He would come to understand, in the years that followed, that Sarah Pere was a woman who meant precisely what she said, not in the performative way of people who make promises to manage a situation. She meant it in the quiet, load-bearing way of someone for whom a stated intention is indistinguishable from a contract. The spare room in Mario's apartment in Mapo-gu was small and faced a brick wall. He cleared it in an evening, moved his storage boxes to the living room, found a second set of bedding, bought a small desk lamp from the market 2 streets down. He did not make a production of it. He set it up, showed her where the kitchen things were, and went to his own room. Sarah sat on the edge of the bed in that small room and looked at the brick wall and felt the specific texture of gratitude that has not yet learned whether it is safe. She went to sleep. The next morning, she was in the kitchen before him, and she had made coffee, found the beans in the cupboard and the grinder on the shelf, and figured out the machine by reading the manual she found folded underneath it. She handed him a cup when he walked in. He took it. Neither of them said anything for a moment. Then Sarah said, "I will be out of your way as soon as possible." "Take the time you need," Mario said. She took 11 months. Not because she was slow. Because the nursing registration process for international candidates in South Korea in those years involved 17 separate documentation steps, 3 examinations delivered in Korean, a 6-month supervised placement at an approved facility, and a final board review that accepted applications only twice yearly. Sarah completed all 17 steps. She sat the 3 Korean examinations, the first time she had ever taken a standardized test in a language she had been studying for 8 months, and passed all 3. She secured a supervised placement at a mid-size hospital in Mapo through the contact Mario had called, a placement coordinator named Dr. Shin, who owed Mario a professional favor and collected it graciously. She studied at the kitchen table after her shifts, the nursing manuals spread across the surface, her notes in English on one side and Korean on the other. Mario would come home to find her there, sometimes at midnight, sometimes at 1 in the morning, and he would make tea without asking and set it beside her notes without interrupting. He paid her registration fees, all 17 steps. He paid her examination costs. He covered her transport, her food, her phone plan. He did not keep a record. She kept one. In a small notebook she bought from a stationery shop near the hospital. Every expenditure, the date, the amount, the purpose. written in her precise, deliberate handwriting. Mario never asked to see the notebook. He did not know it existed. Now, I know some of you are doing the mental calculation right now. 17 documentation steps, 3 Korean examinations, 11 months in a spare room. Some of you are thinking, this man is either a saint or a fool. Some of you are thinking, I wouldn't even do this for my own family. Either way, like, subscribe, and stay seated. Because Mario Monroy has not yet met his biggest problem, and she has a last name. Her name was Elena Vasquez. She and Mario had been together for 3 years before Sarah arrived, separated for 14 months when Sarah moved in, and in the careful, unresolved space that exists between two people who have history but no clear future when the situation became complicated. Elena was from Valencia. She worked remotely for a European tech firm and had followed Mario to Seoul with the understanding, which Mario had never explicitly confirmed, that their separation was temporary and their reunion was only a matter of timing. She was intelligent, precise, and deeply uncomfortable with the arrangement in Mario's apartment, not because she believed anything inappropriate was occurring. She had met Sarah twice and understood immediately that what existed between Mario and Sarah was not romantic. What bothered Elena was more subtle and in some ways more threatening. Mario had not asked her opinion before he offered Sarah the room. He had not consulted her, had not considered, apparently, how it might appear or what it might cost him socially or professionally to have a single woman, a stranger, living in his home. He had simply done it. And when Elena raised this, carefully and then less carefully, Mario had said, she had nowhere to go. What would you have had me do? Elena had said, ask someone else. Mario had said, there was no one else. I was there. It was a truthful answer. It was also the answer of a man who had made a decision and was not going to unmake it, which was a quality Elena had always admired in Mario in professional contexts and found considerably less admirable in personal ones. The tension grew slowly. Elena began visiting the apartment more frequently, not to spend time with Mario exactly, but to be present, to have her presence registered. She would arrive on Saturday mornings and cook lunch and arrange the kitchen the way she preferred it and make small observations about the state of Mario's living situation that were directed obliquely at Sarah. Sarah noticed. She always noticed. But she had not come to Seoul to manage someone else's relationship dynamics. She was polite, quiet, and careful not to occupy space that was not hers to occupy. She ate her meals quickly. She stayed in her room when Elena visited. She left the kitchen spotless. It was not enough. One evening in the 6th month of Sarah's stay, Elena arrived unannounced and found Mario at the kitchen table, helping Sarah review a section of her Korean nursing terminology that she was struggling with, the pharmacological classifications, which have specific syllabic patterns that do not map naturally onto Yoruba or English phonetics. He was reading the terms aloud, and she was repeating them, her notebook open, her pen moving. It was entirely unremarkable, but Elena stood in the doorway and looked at the two of them, the shared lamp, the open notebooks, the easy quiet between them, and something in her face closed. She said nothing that evening. But a week later, she gave Mario an ultimatum. Not aggressively. Elena was not an aggressive woman. She delivered it with the composed precision of someone who has decided that the conversation has been deferred long enough. I need you to choose, she said, whether she stays or whether we rebuild what we had. I cannot do both at the same time. Mario was quiet for a long time. She has 5 months left on her placement, he said. She is 3 examinations away from full registration. I am not going to remove her from the situation now. Then you are choosing her, Elena said. I am choosing not to abandon someone in the middle of something they started, Mario said. That is a different thing. Elena looked at him. "Is it?" she said. She left. Sarah, who had been in her room and had heard the raised voices without hearing the words, came out when the door closed and found Mario standing in the kitchen with his hands on the counter and his eyes on the floor. "I'm sorry," she said. "Mario, I will find somewhere else." "You will not," he said, without turning around. "This is because of me." "No," he said. He turned. "This is because of a conversation that was waiting to happen long before you arrived. You didn't cause it. You just made it unavoidable." Sarah looked at him. She had a very particular quality, an ability to see the full shape of a situation without being told about it. She had been using it since childhood, the survival intelligence of a person who learned early that reading the room was not a social skill, but a practical one. She saw the full shape of Mario Monroy in that kitchen, in that moment. A man who had given something freely, a man who would not take it back to protect himself, a man who was going to absorb the cost of his own generosity without complaint or credit. She went back to her room. She opened her notebook. She wrote down the date, and below it she wrote 3 words: "I will remember." The next 5 months were the hardest of Sarah Pere's life, not because the work was difficult, though it was, not because the examinations were demanding, though they were the hardest tests she had ever sat. The hardest part was simpler and more private than any of that. The hardest part was knowing that her presence was costing Mario something he would not name. She saw it in the small ways that a perceptive person sees things that are not announced. He was quieter. He came home later. The easy rhythm of the apartment, the morning coffee, the late-night tea beside the study notes, remained, but there was something underneath it now that had not been there before. A weight. A thing that had been asked of him and that he was carrying without complaint, the way people carry things they have decided are not negotiable. Sarah doubled her hours at the placement hospital. She arrived 30 minutes before her shift started and left 40 minutes after it ended. She studied on the subway. She studied on her lunch break. She studied at the kitchen table and in her room, and on the nights when the Korean pharmacological classifications still refused to settle into her memory, she made voice recordings on her phone and played them on a loop while she slept. She passed her final examination with the 3rd highest score of her cohort. When the results arrived, she sat with her phone in the kitchen and read the notification 4 times. Then she went to find Mario. He was in the living room reviewing a logistics report for work. She handed him the phone. He read the notification. He looked up. For a moment, something moved across his face. Not surprise, not pride exactly, but the expression of a person watching something they believed in arrive at the conclusion they were certain it would reach. "You did it," he said. "We did it," Sarah said. And she meant it precisely. He nodded. He handed the phone back. "Dr. Shin called last week," he said. "There is a permanent nursing position at the Mapo hospital. He thought of you. He said to tell you to apply before Friday." Sarah applied Thursday morning. She was offered the position the following week. On the day she received the official offer letter, she sat at the kitchen table with her notebook open and added up the total of everything Mario Monroy had spent on her registration, examinations, transport, accommodation, and food across 11 months. The number was significant. She had expected it to be. She had been watching it grow for 11 months. She closed the notebook. She said nothing to Mario. But she began, from that day, to form a plan. Not a plan to disappear, not a plan to drift away now that the crisis had passed. A plan of a different kind, the kind that requires patience and contacts and the slow, careful work of becoming someone who has something to give. She moved out of Mario's apartment 3 weeks after receiving the job offer. She found a small studio in Mapo, close enough to the hospital to walk, far enough from Mario's building to give Elena, who had been in cautious orbit since their confrontation, the space she required. She and Mario remained in contact. Not daily. Both of them were working long hours. Both were building the versions of themselves that Seoul demanded. But the contact was real. A message on Sunday mornings, dinner once a month at a small restaurant near the Han River that neither of them had chosen for any particular reason, and both of them came to think of as theirs. At these dinners, Mario did not ask about the notebook. Sarah did not mention the plan. Elena, who had drifted back into Mario's life with the careful re-entry of a person who knew the obstacle had been removed, did not know about the dinners. Sarah was not hiding them. If Elena had asked, she would have said, "We have dinner once a month. He helped me through the hardest year of my life. I am not going to stop being his friend because it is convenient for someone else." But Elena did not ask. She had learned by then that Mario and Sarah occupied a part of each other's lives that did not have a category she could contest. It was not romantic. It was not professional. It was the particular bond of a person who was there at the exact moment when being there was the only thing that mattered. Elena could not compete with that. She knew it. She decided, quietly, not to try. I see some of you in the comments right now typing, "But when does Ju-hyung appear?" He is coming. He is always coming in stories like this. Slowly, from a direction nobody expected, at a moment that changes everything. But trust the pacing. The best arrivals in any story are the ones you felt before you saw them. Subscribe. Stay close. You will understand why shortly. Ju-hyung was not a man who announced himself. He had built his operation across 15 years of deliberate invisibility, the kind that requires not just secrecy, but the active performance of ordinariness. He owned 3 registered businesses in Seoul, a freight logistics firm in Yeongdongpo, a catering supply company in Mapogu, and a small hotel in Itaewon that operated at modest occupancy and filed unremarkable annual returns. None of these businesses were the source of his actual income. None of them were intended to be. He was 41 years old. He had never been married. He had no children that anyone knew of. He moved through Seoul with the unhurried confidence of a man who understood that the city owed him nothing and that he had taken what he needed from it anyway. He was, by every objective measure, the last person Sarah Pere should have encountered. She encountered him on a Tuesday evening in February in the emergency bay of the Mapo hospital because he had been brought in by 2 of his associates after sustaining a knife wound to the upper left arm in an altercation that the associates described to the receiving nurse as a kitchen accident. The receiving nurse was Sarah Pere. She looked at the wound. She looked at the 2 associates. She looked at the man on the gurney, who was regarding her with the flat, measuring expression of someone assessing whether the person in front of them is a problem or a resource. "Kitchen accident," she said. It was not a question. "Kitchen accident," the nearest associate confirmed. Sarah looked at the wound again. It was clean, precise, and in a location that no kitchen implement had ever accidentally reached. "All right," she said. "Both of you wait outside." The associates looked at Ju-hyung. He nodded once. They left. Sarah cleaned and sutured the wound with the efficiency of someone who had been doing this for 18 months and was not easily disrupted. She did not ask further questions about the accident. She did not call the police. The wound, though clearly not from a kitchen, was not life-threatening, and the reporting guidelines in those years were less clear than they should have been. What she did do was something that no one in Ju-hyung's orbit had done in a very long time. She talked to him as if he were a person. Not nervously, not deferentially, not with the careful over-politeness of someone who has recognized who he is and is managing the situation. She spoke to him the way she spoke to every patient, directly, informatively, with the specific warmth of a nurse who understands that the body on the table is also a human being who is frightened, even when they do not show it. "The sutures need to stay in for 7 days," she said, finishing the dressing. If you feel heat in the arm or see any redness spreading from the wound, come back immediately. Don't wait to see if it resolves. It won't. Ju-hyung looked at her. You're not Korean, he said. No, she said. Nigerian? Yes. He was quiet for a moment. How long have you been in Seoul? 18 months. He studied her with the expression he used when he was calculating something he had not yet decided whether to act on. You speak Korean well, he said. I had a very intensive first year, she said. She removed her gloves. Do you have questions about the aftercare instructions? He almost smiled. Not quite. No, he said. Then I'll send the discharge paperwork through. The nurse at the desk will have it ready in 10 minutes. She left the bay. In the corridor, she leaned against the wall for 3 full seconds and let herself feel the adrenaline that she had not allowed herself to feel inside the room. Then she straightened, picked up the next file, and continued her shift. Ju-hyung returned 6 days later. Not to the emergency bay. He came to the hospital's main reception and asked, at the desk, for the nurse who had treated him the previous week. The receptionist called Sarah. She came to the lobby and found him standing near the entrance in a plain dark coat, holding a paper bag. He held it out when she approached. Halabong oranges, he said, from Jeju, for the staff. Sarah looked at the bag. In her years of nursing, she had received many things from patients: chocolates, flowers, notes, occasionally fruit. She had learned to receive them graciously and without overreading them. This was different. She took the bag. Thank you, she said. That was thoughtful. He nodded. I have a question, he said, not medical. She waited. The man who sponsored your nursing registration, he said. His name is Mario Monroy. He works in logistics. He has a freight contract that overlaps with one of my businesses. Sarah was very still. I know this, Ju-hyung said, because I make it my business to understand the people who come through my operations. When I encountered you, I wanted to know your story. You investigated me, she said. Yes, he said, without apology. She looked at him steadily. And, she said. And I would like to have coffee, he said, if you are willing. Sarah Pere looked at Ju-hyung, this man who had arrived in her emergency bay with a knife wound and a cover story, who had come back 6 days later with Jeju oranges and a question, who apparently knew more about her circumstances than she had volunteered to anyone, and made a decision in approximately 4 seconds. I finish at 6, she said. Coffee became dinner. Dinner became a walk along the Han River. The walk became a conversation that lasted 4 hours and covered ground that neither of them had covered with anyone else in a very long time. Ju-hyung was not, Sarah discovered, the person that his reputation suggested. He was that person. She did not make the mistake of thinking the reputation was invented, but he was also a man who had been entirely alone inside his own life for 15 years, who had surrounded himself with associates and employees and a carefully maintained network of obligation and fear, and who had not, in all that time, had a conversation with anyone that was simply honest. Sarah Pere was constitutionally incapable of dishonesty. Not because she was naive, she was the opposite of naive, but because she had decided, at some point in her childhood in Lagos, that the energy required to maintain an untruth was energy better spent elsewhere. She told Ju-hyung that evening exactly who she was, where she had come from, what the last 18 months had cost, and what they had produced. She told him about Mario, about the immigration office, about the spare room and the registration fees, and the notebook she still kept, updated to the most recent figure. She told him about Elena, about the ultimatum and Mario's answer, and the weight she had seen him carrying. She told him about the plan she had begun forming the day she received her job offer, the plan that was still incomplete because she did not yet have the means to execute it. Ju-hyung listened. He was a man who had spent 15 years listening to people tell him things they needed him to hear in order to get something they wanted from him. He was extraordinarily good at hearing the thing underneath the thing, the real request beneath the stated one, the fear beneath the confidence, the calculation beneath the apparent generosity. He heard none of those things in Sarah. What he heard was a woman who had decided, before she even had the means to act on it, that she was going to repay Mario Monroy for every coin he had spent on her. Not out of obligation, or not only out of obligation. Out of the specific understanding that a debt of that kind, if left unpaid, becomes a kind of diminishment. That to receive something extraordinary and give nothing back is to reduce yourself. He sat with that for a long time after she stopped speaking. "What do you need?" he asked. "I need a freight logistics contract," she said. "Specifically, I need Mario's company to be awarded a long-term contract with a firm that has the size and stability to change his position significantly. He has been underpaid for years. He has stayed at the mid-level company because it was stable and the work was good, but there is a ceiling, and he has been at it for 3 years. Ju-hyung was quiet. "You want me to use my business relationships to advance a man I have never met?" he said. "I want you to use your business relationships to correct an imbalance," she said. "Mario Monroy is exceptional at what he does. He would earn the contract. I am only asking you to put it in front of him." Ju-hyung looked at her. "And what do you get," he said, "from this arrangement?" Sarah looked back at him. "The ability to sleep without a notebook on my bedside table," she said. He almost smiled again. This time it reached his eyes. "I will look into it," he said. He looked into it. What he found was that Sarah Pere had not exaggerated. Mario Monroy's professional record was exceptional. 11 years of documented performance, 0 incidents, 3 industry commendations, and a client retention rate that outperformed every comparable logistics coordinator in his bracket. He had been passed over for 2 senior positions at his company in favor of Korean nationals, a pattern that Ju-hyung, who understood institutional dynamics in Seoul better than almost anyone, recognized immediately as structural rather than meritocratic. Ju-hyung had a relationship with the regional director of a major Korean-European freight consortium that had been looking for a logistics director for its new Incheon-Rotterdam corridor for 6 months. The position had been quietly relisted 3 times because the candidates kept falling short. He made a call. He said, "I know someone. Let me just stop here for 1 moment." Sarah Pere walked into Ju-hyung's world with a notebook, a plan, and absolutely no fear. And Ju-hyung, a man whose name made freight directors take his calls immediately, just used his most important business relationship for a nurse, for a plan she formed before she even had the means to execute it. Subscribe. You already know you need to see how this ends. Mario Monroy received the call on a Thursday morning in April. It came from the regional director of the Incheon-Rotterdam Freight Consortium, a name that Mario knew by reputation, the way everyone in Seoul logistics knew it, the way you know the names of the firms that occupy an altitude you have been looking up at without expecting to reach. The director said he had received a strong recommendation. He said he was not at liberty to name the source. He said he would like Mario to come in for a conversation about a logistics director position on a new corridor that the consortium was building. Mario sat at his desk for a long time after the call ended. He had not applied for the position. He had not circulated his CV. He had not told anyone, outside of a general professional frustration that he kept carefully contained, that he felt the ceiling of his current role had been reached. He called Sarah. "Did you do something?" he asked. There was a pause on the line. "I introduced someone to your professional record," she said. "The rest is yours to earn." Sarah. "Mario, go to the meeting." He went to the meeting. The conversation lasted 2 hours. The director was direct and technically fluent in a way that Mario found immediately comfortable. A man who had built things and understood what building things required. They spoke about corridor architecture, about the Incheon port infrastructure, about Rotterdam integration challenges, about the specific profile of the hire the consortium needed. At the end of the meeting, the director slid a document across the table. Mario looked at the figure. It was 3.5 times his current salary. He looked up. "We are not negotiating that number down," the director said. "We are potentially negotiating it up, depending on what the first performance review produces." Mario took the position. He gave his notice at the mid-level company on a Friday. He went home that evening and sat in his apartment and thought about 11 years of working toward an altitude that had arrived from an unexpected direction, because a woman he had sat down beside in an immigration office had decided, without telling him, that his generosity would not go unreturned. He called Sarah again that evening. "I want to take you to dinner," he said. "The Han River place." "Sunday," she said. "Sunday," he agreed. He arrived at the restaurant on Sunday evening and found that Sarah had booked the table and ordered the wine and was sitting with the small notebook open in front of her. She slid it across the table when he sat down. He looked at it. 11 months of entries, every date, every amount, every purpose. Her precise handwriting running down the pages in columns. Below the last entry, she had written a total, and below that, in different ink, more recent, "Settled in full, with interest that cannot be calculated in numbers." Mario looked at the notebook for a long time. Then he looked at her. "You didn't owe me this," he said. "I told you in the immigration office," she said. "Every coin." "Sarah, I am not finished," she said, and her voice was steady and warm and entirely certain. "You gave me a room when I had no room. You paid for everything I could not pay for, and you never kept a record because you never intended to collect. You let a relationship that mattered to you take damage rather than remove me from a situation I was halfway through. I saw all of it. I kept the record because you would not." Mario was quiet. "Elena and I are getting married," he said. "She asked me last month. Or I asked her. It was mutual. It is—" He paused. "It is the right time. She is ready. I am ready." Sarah smiled, and the smile was entirely genuine, not the kind that covers something else, but the kind of smile that belongs to a person who is genuinely happy for someone they love in the non-romantic way that is, sometimes, the deeper kind. "She is lucky," Sarah said, "even if she does not yet know the full version of why." Mario laughed. For the first time in a long time, the laugh was completely unguarded. Joo-hyung did not pursue Sarah. He was not a man who pursued. He had never found pursuit necessary, and he had never found it interesting. What interested him, what had always interested him, was the specific quality of a person who knew exactly who they were and did not require anyone else's confirmation of it. He had met very few such people in his life. After the consortium call was made and Mario Monroy's trajectory had been quietly redirected, Joo-hyung and Sarah continued to meet. Not frequently, not with any declared intention. They met for coffee on Tuesday evenings when her shift allowed it. They walked occasionally along the Han. They talked about Seoul, about Lagos, about Seville, about the logistics of a life built far from the place where it began. About the particular negotiation required to become the person you intended to be in a city that rewards performance and punishes sentiment. Joo-hyung was, Sarah discovered over months, in the middle of a slow and deliberate restructuring of his own life. He was not, he told her one evening, willing to spend the next 15 years maintaining something he had spent the first 15 years building out of necessity. The necessity had passed. The infrastructure remained. What he was trying to understand was how to dismantle the parts that no longer served him without destroying the parts that were legitimate. "That is a complicated problem," Sarah said. "Yes," he said. "Have you spoken to anyone about it?" "I am speaking to you about it," he said. She looked at him. "I am a nurse," she said. "Not a lawyer, not a financial advisor, not a restructuring consultant." "I know what you are," he said. And the way he said it was the first time in all their months of conversation that the thing beneath the thing was visible. Sarah was quiet for a long time. She thought about the immigration office and the plastic chair and the $40. She thought about the spare room and the notebook and the man who had made tea at midnight without being asked. She thought about the plan she had formed before she had the means to execute it, and about the man who had helped her execute it without asking why. She thought about what it meant to be in Seoul, this city that did not apologize for its contradictions, and to have arrived with nothing, and to have built something real. She looked at Ju-hyung. "I think," she said carefully, "that the person you are trying to become is someone I would like to know." "And the person I am currently?" he said. "Also someone I would like to know," she said, "but less." He was quiet for a moment. Then he laughed, a real laugh, unguarded in a way that his face was not accustomed to being. Sarah Pei looked at him and thought, "There it is. There is the person underneath." Over the following year, things changed quietly and without drama. Ju-hyung began the legal restructuring of his freight logistics firm with the help of an attorney he brought in from outside Seoul. 2 of his 3 registered businesses were converted into fully legitimate operations. The third, the hotel, was sold. The parts of his operation that could not be made legitimate, he stepped back from. Methodically, without incident, over 18 months. It was not a transformation. It was a decision, followed by the 1,000 smaller decisions required to act on it. Sarah watched it happen. She did not take credit for it. She had not caused it. Ju-hyung had been moving in this direction before he met her, slowly and without a clear destination. She had simply been the person he had been honest with, possibly for the first time, about where he was trying to go. She continued her nursing career. She was promoted to senior nurse within 2 years of registration. She was offered a ward coordinator position that she accepted and then grew within quietly and completely. She moved to a larger apartment. She bought good furniture. She called her mother in Lagos every Sunday morning and listened to the Surulere Savings Group news and sent money home on the 1st of every month without fail. She built her life, piece by piece. With the same discipline she had brought to the 17-step registration process. Seoul, which does not apologize for its contradictions, made space for her, as it always makes space for people who refuse to leave. Mario Monroy married Elena Vasquez on a Saturday in June, in a ceremony held in a small garden restaurant in Mapogu. Sarah Pere was not there. Not because she was not invited, she was, but she had a double shift that weekend and did not ask to swap it, and Mario had understood, in the way that people who know each other well understand things, that her absence was not a withdrawal, but a gift of a different kind. The clean space for 2 people to begin something without the weight of a complicated history visible at the table. He received a card from her that morning, hand-delivered by a colleague before the ceremony. Inside it, she had written 4 sentences. "You gave me a room when I had none. You paid for a future you would never share. You chose, at considerable cost, to remain the person you are. That is what I learned from you. Build something worthy of it." Mario stood outside the restaurant, holding the card for a long time. Then he folded it carefully, put it in his jacket pocket, and went inside to marry Elena. 18 months later, Sarah Pere and Ju-hyung were married in a private ceremony on Jeju Island, the place where, almost 3 years earlier, he had sent the oranges that had begun a different kind of conversation. There were 14 guests. Mario was one of them. Elena, who had learned over time the full version of the story and had arrived eventually at a version of understanding, came with him. And Seoul, which does not pause for anyone's story and does not offer easy endings, simply continued below them, relentless, brilliant, indifferent, and, on that particular afternoon, very beautiful. There is a version of this story that people expect, a version where the woman who was helped forgets, and the man who helped her suffers, and the audience is asked to confirm what they already suspected, that generosity is a liability, that trust is a failure of judgment, that the world takes from the people who give. That version is told many times. This one is different. Sarah Pere did not forget. She could not forget. She was a woman for whom memory was not sentiment, but responsibility. She had written every coin in a notebook and carried it for 18 months because she had made a promise in an immigration office with $40 in her pocket, and she was not a person for whom a promise was something you made to manage a situation. She kept it. Across the distance of continents and careers and complications, in the way that matters, not loudly, not with ceremony, but with the patient, load-bearing quiet of someone who understands that loyalty is not a feeling, it is a practice, and it is always, eventually, worth the cost.